Iran shaken by nationwide protests as economic collapse, public anger, and global pressure collide. Iran entered one of its most volatile periods in years this week as demonstrations erupted across the country, spreading rapidly from Tehran's commercial heart into universities, industrial districts, and provincial cities. What began as economic frustration has evolved into a broad-based expression of political defiance, fueled by inflation, currency collapse, and decades of unresolved public grievances. By Tuesday, protests had continued for a third consecutive day, defying heavy security deployments and drawing rare international attention after U.S. President Donald Trump and senior American officials publicly voiced support for demonstrators. Although Trump stopped short of calling for regime change, his comments underscored the severity of Iran's internal crisis and highlighted the regime's violent response to dissent. For Iran's leadership, the scale and persistence of the unrest represent a dangerous convergence of economic failure, social pressure, and declining public fear, conditions that analysts warn could destabilize the country if left unresolved. A collapsing economy pushes Iranians to the edge. At the core of the unrest lies Iran's rapidly deteriorating economy. The national currency, the rial, plunged to historic lows this week, trading at roughly 1.45 million rials per US dollar on the open market. The collapse sent shockwaves through nearly every sector of Iranian society, from small shop owners and factory workers to students and pensioners. For many Iranians, the currency crash was not merely another economic statistic, it was the breaking point. Basic goods became increasingly unaffordable overnight. Import-dependent industries ground to a halt. Merchants found themselves unable to restock shelves or price products with any certainty. Savings evaporated in real time, while wages lagged far behind inflation that has steadily eroded purchasing power for years. Economic frustration has simmered in Iran for decades, but the speed and severity of the current collapse has intensified public outrage, transforming quiet despair into open resistance. The Grand Bazaar, a historic signal of dissent. One of the most significant developments occurred in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, long considered both an economic engine and a political bellwether. Entire sections of the bazaar shut down as merchants staged strikes, locking the doors in protest of what they described as impossible business conditions. Gold traders, currency dealers, mobile phone sellers, and wholesalers joined the walkouts, spilling into nearby streets to voice their anger. Historically, the participation of bazaar merchants carries deep political meaning. The bazaar class played a pivotal role in Iran's 1979 revolution, and for decades afterward, it remained one of the Islamic Republic's most reliable pillars of support. This time, however, the same merchants appeared to be turning against the system they once helped sustain. Strikes quickly spread beyond Tehran into districts such as Shosh and Malawi, while similar shutdowns were reported in other major cities, including Isfahan, where shopkeepers around the iconic Naksh-e-Jahan Square closed their businesses in solidarity. Student campuses transform into protest zones. As the economic protests expanded, Iran's universities emerged as major centers of resistance. Students gathered at some of the country's most prominent institutions, including Tehran University, Sharif University of Technology, Shahid Beheshti University, Elmo Sanat University, and Kharjeh Nazir University. Chanting slogans against the ruling establishment, protesters accused the government of corruption, repression, and economic mismanagement. University campuses have long served as incubators of political activism in Iran, and this wave of unrest proved no exception. Young demonstrators, many of whom have grown up under sanctions, censorship, and limited opportunity, voiced a profound sense of betrayal and hopelessness about their future. In response, security forces tightened access to campuses, erecting checkpoints, limiting entry, and reinforcing buildings associated with Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The show of force only heightened tensions, with students accusing authorities of militarizing spaces meant for education. Videos circulating online showed confrontations between students and security personnel, with crowds refusing orders to disperse and chanting slogans such as "Death to the Dictator." Clashes escalate as security forces respond. As demonstrations intensified, confrontations between protesters and security forces grew increasingly violent. Witness accounts and footage described the widespread use of tear gas in Tehran and surrounding areas, including Malad. In more severe incidents, reports emerged of live ammunition being used in cities such as Hamadan, claims that could not be independently verified due to restricted access for journalists. Nighttime demonstrations erupted across the country, from Keshem Island in southern Iran to northern provinces like Zanjan and Hamadan. Protesters gathered after dark, lighting fires, blocking roads, and chanting anti-government slogans under the cover of night. Despite heavy security deployments, crowds continued to reassemble, signaling a growing willingness among demonstrators to challenge state authority even at significant personal risk. The exiled opposition coalition National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, reported that protests and strikes had spread to dozens of cities and towns, describing what it characterized as a nationwide uprising rather than isolated unrest. According to the NCRI, workers, students, merchants, and professionals participated in coordinated actions, with security forces struggling to contain demonstrations in multiple locations simultaneously. One video released by the group appeared to show protesters pushing back security forces on Tehran's Jomhuri Street, forcing them to retreat. While the footage circulated widely online, independent verification remains difficult due to censorship and restrictions inside Iran. NCRI leader Maryam Rajavi said the protests reflected the anger of tens of millions of Iranians driven to desperation by inflation, corruption, and clerical rule. She described the demonstrations as a rejection of the Islamic Republic's legitimacy. It is important to note that NCRI reporting represents opposition claims and cannot be independently confirmed. As protests spread, U.S. President Donald Trump addressed the situation during remarks at Mar-a-Lago, drawing international attention to Iran's internal crisis. Trump emphasized that the unrest stemmed from economic collapse rather than foreign interference, pointing to soaring inflation and widespread poverty. "I'm not going to talk about overthrow of a regime," Trump said. But their economy. Iranian officials publicly acknowledged the demonstrations but defended the government's handling of the situation. Government spokeswoman Fatemeh Mohajerani said authorities recognized public grievances and planned to establish a mechanism for dialogue with protest leaders. President Masoud Pezeshkian reportedly instructed the Interior Minister to address what he described as protesters' legitimate demands. Critics, however, questioned whether such statements represented meaningful engagement or were merely attempts to diffuse pressure without implementing substantive reforms. Past protest movements in Iran have often been met with similar promises, followed by renewed crackdowns once demonstrations subsided. Analysts warn of a critical threshold. Independent analysts warn that Iran's current unrest reflects deeper structural problems that cannot be resolved through short-term concessions. The OSINT research group Special Eurasia said Iran's internal stability has reached a critical threshold, citing a convergence of destabilizing factors. Currency collapse, renewed international sanctions, chronic water shortages, energy infrastructure failures, declining public trust in governance. Analysts emphasized that the participation of Bazaar merchants, a historically loyal constituency, signals a profound erosion of confidence in the state's economic management. Shifting public mood and new political symbols. Some observers noted signs of shifting political sentiment among protesters. Cameron Khan-Serenia, vice president of the National Union for Democracy in Iran, said chants supporting Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi have become increasingly audible, a notable development in a country where monarchist sentiment has been suppressed for decades. Khan-Serenia argued that the protests reflect a growing belief among Iranians that the risks of resistance may now outweigh the costs of silence. "The desire to be free is becoming stronger than fear," he said. As protests continue, reliable information on casualties and arrests remains scarce. Internet slowdowns, censorship, and media restrictions have limited independent verification, leaving many questions unanswered. Still, the scale, persistence, and geographic spread of the unrest underscore the immense pressure facing Iran's leadership. Economic collapse, public defiance, and international scrutiny are converging in ways that analysts say could shape Iran's future for years to come. Whether the demonstrations will evolve into sustained nationwide resistance remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that Iran has entered a period of heightened instability, one where long-standing grievances are no longer confined to whispers but are now echoing through streets, campuses, and marketplaces across the country.